This is a sew along for the perfect size travel bag or a journaling bag. It is 10 inches wide and 3.5 inches tall and 2 3/4 inches wide, and it fits like 35 pens. It's just such a great size. So here I'm just showing you what the fabric requirements are, and you will find all of them in the description. But we basically need for the outside of the bag 2 pieces that are 6 inches by 14 inches long. And for me, I cut them a little bit bigger to begin with, but when we trim them down, it's going to be 6 by 14 inches. So if you're using yardage, you would use like 2 fat quarters, or it would be like a total of a ½ yard of fabric. But you could use whatever yardage you have, and then maybe some scraps too. So I'll just show you step by step as we go along here. If you're a beginner, this is a perfect project for you, and I'll give you like every single step. So we put a quilt sandwich together. So you put the 6 by 14 inch rectangle on top of a piece of batting and cut that out, and then we'll put that on top of our next fabric, which is going to be our inside fabric. So we'll also need 2 rectangles of inside fabric, and I'm doing the inside out of like a contrasting like charcoal gray fabric, and then the outside here is a really pretty like rosy pink batik fabric. So I'm just going to quilt this very sparingly since it is a nice batik pattern and I really want that to show. So I'm just drawing chalk lines here, and I just drew them like 1.5 inches apart. So I have 3 quilting lines, and I'm just running them through my sewing machine as normal. But I do pick a color thread that kind of matches so that it kind of melts into the fabric. But there's no special setup in the machine going on. I'm just putting it right through my machine. So you also for this project will need a 12-inch zipper. So I'm just going to quilt these 3 lines of quilting through this quilt. We call it a quilt sandwich, and basically the fabric, if you're going to quilt, we typically use 100% cotton fabric. So if you go into a store and there's like a quilting fabric section, that's all that means, is that it's 100% cotton fabric, and then we're going to use a little bit of quilt batting. So if you don't know where to get that, they do sell that at Michael's in like a craft size, so a small size. So if you're just getting started with any kind of quilting projects, that's a perfect size to start with. And it is a good item to get with a coupon or on sale, because quilt batting can add up if you don't buy it on sale. But it is a wonderful thing to do projects with, because basically, well, quilting I think is very therapeutic, but like when we're doing these bags, they turn out really beautifully, and they're also machine washable, so you can just throw them right in the wash. So I feel like if you're doing like these boxy zipper pouches with lining and stabilizers, it's kind of the same difference to me. So I'd much rather do like a quilted bag, which is fully finished, and it's just, I think they're super pretty. It's like having a more fashionable looking bag, and it's almost like making a blankie at the same time. So I just love that. So here I'm going to add a couple pieces of fabric to the ends of the zipper. So we take the 3-inch squares, we have 2 of them, one for each side of the zipper, and you want your square facing up and you want your zipper facing down. And then we're just going to fold this over, where the one side here we've got kind of a fold back, and then our underside we just kind of fold that up, leave that a raw edge, but I'll show you again here. Just fold one side of it up, and that just gives us a nice edge when we turn this inside out. So I've placed that about 1/2 inch from the edge of the square where the zipper stop is. It's like a bigger metal stop. And then we're just going to take our normal 1/4 inch seam here. If you can kind of snug it up to that metal stop, that's perfect. That's kind of what we're trying to do here. And I'm just doing this with my regular foot, not a zipper foot, but you certainly could change it to a zipper foot if you would like to do that. So here we just kind of pull this inside out, and then it just gives us a nice finished piece of fabric here. And remember, we turn that zipper over, so this is the back side of our zipper. And I just finger press this And so now we do that on the other side of the zipper. We do that on both sides. And then now we're going back to our quilted sandwiches here. So the reason why we do two is it's like one for the left side of the bag, one for the right side of the bag. And we're going to put a 2 by 14 inch strip. And this is going to be a binding strip. So you want to find the top of your outside fabric if it has a direction. And we're just going to do this to this one side of this quilted piece, and then we'll do the exact same thing on the other quilted piece. But I'm adding it to the back, to the inside fabric, this long strip, and it's like right sides together. And we're just going to sew this on. All seams here are a 1/4 inch seam unless I mentioned something different. So we're just going to sew this seam down, and then we will bring it around to the front. And then we'll have a really nice binding strip. So for this is a great like design decision. You can do the exact same fabric, or like me, you can do a contrasting fabric. And I'm just going to fold that in about a 1/4 inch and then fold it again. And that gives us a nice finished edge. And since we're starting it on the inside fabric and bringing it around to our outside fabric, this will look super neat and tidy on the outside the bag. Now this strip is what sits right next to our zipper. So if you want to do like a contrasting color like I'm doing here, just realize that whatever it is what's going to be sitting right next to that zipper on the top of the bag. So I'm just folding this whole side over and just trying to keep it consistent size wise, and then I'm going to sew just catching that folded edge. And we do want this to cover up that first seam that we just sewed the strip on with. So this is called a binding strip, and this is used a lot in clothing and bags and different things, but this is also how you would bind a large quilt. That's how we finish the edges. And that's nice because if the quilt is wearing out, it tends to be wearing out on this binding strip area, and so those are easily replaced. It just helps our quilts to last a lot longer. But this will end up, like once you make this bag, this is a tough little bag, so this will last you for years and years. And that's the great thing about quilting things, it just makes things a lot more durable. And again, machine washable, so you can just throw it. I usually put them inside out and just throw it right in the washing machine. So here we finished this binding strip on our first quilted piece, and we just want to do the exact same thing on the other piece. So obviously we're doing one long edge, and you would just pick the one where your fabric is, like you're putting this at the top of your fabric. So now we're putting our quilted piece, just pick one, and we'll match this up to our zipper. We're going to sew this on, but you want to make sure your zipper is centered, so you're going to have about an inch worth of that fabric that we added. You're going to have about an inch on each end, so just make sure that's centered. And then sewing this on, so for me, my zipper pull, I have to kind of pull it out of the way and sew, and then later I'll put my foot up and put that pull back in place. So just so you realize, you can do that if you have a larger zipper pull. And for here, all I'm doing is sewing. I'm placing this about 1/8 of an inch away from the zipper teeth, from that to the edge of my binding strip, and then I'm just top stitching that down. So pretty simple. Sewing this down, I probably do it, like I said, about 1/16 of an inch away from that binding strip edge. And I'm just going slow and trying to get it nice and consistent. So whatever sizes you pick here is totally fine. It's just that you want to keep it consistent, because this is right by the zipper, obviously, and we just want it'll be showing. So this, we just want to keep it nice and straight. And then when we put the second side on, you'll kind of see as you're sewing this that this almost sews itself. It's a very easy way to put a zipper on. There's a lot of difficult ways, I feel, to put zippers on, and I feel like this is probably the easiest way to put one on. You're just kind of top stitching it on there. So I'm just going to test the zipper a little bit and just make sure that it opens and shuts. And I'm just going to match that next side, we're going to make sure that those sides are level to each other. So I have, just a reminder, this is the outsides of the bag showing and the good side of the zipper is showing. And again, I have to open my zipper a little bit because my zipper pull is big. So I'm just going to go ahead and sew kind of a mirror seam here, and that just means that the same kind of thing I did on the first side, I want to do the same thing on this side. I'm just using my regular foot, but if you did want to change to a zipper foot, that's totally fine. For me, it works with my regular foot, so I just kind of left that on. But I love this step because when you're finished with this, you can really see your whole bag coming together. So I really love that. And I also love being able to pick like the different fabrics for these binding strips because it changes the look of the entire bag. So for me, it's kind of fun to pull like strips out of my scraps and just kind of experiment with different combinations of fabric. That's like my favorite thing about making things. So love doing that on these bags with this type of binding strip next to the zipper. I just think it's such a great look. So at this point, I'm just going to test out my zipper, make sure it's going nice and smooth. And since we don't have Joann's, this is the first time I've ordered from a company called Waywack, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but I did order the zipper from them as well as some scissors, and this is just the smoothest zipper that I've ever had. So love this. It was only like $1 and something, so I really just wanted to experiment with buying zippers from them, and I love it. It's so nice, so I'm thrilled. And it has a really cool zipper pull on it too, so pretty thrilled with that purchase. So now the bag, we want to open the zipper and we have the insides of the bag showing. And you're going to take your last 2 by 14 inch strip, and it can be longer than 14. You just trim it down. So you can just pull that out of your scrap bag if you happen to have 2-inch strips, which I seem to always have those. So here I'm just going to add this. So what we're doing is we're sewing that bottom seam shut, again with a 1/4 inch seam, and at the same time we're sewing that seam shut, I'm also adding another binding strip here. So once we bring that around to the other side, then it's a very finished off seam. And it's only really one extra line of stitching to do, so we're not, even though we're adding binding strips, we're not doing a whole lot of extra sewing. We're putting them on right as we'd be sewing anyway, so I feel like it saves some time here. And now I folded that binding strip around, which is kind of hard to see since this is matching. And I really like to do contrasting strips on the inside, but this time I just picked a matching one. So I'm just going to take that seam all the way down, and then the bottom of our bag will be sewn shut. So just a reminder, you do want your zipper open at this point. So now we're going to fold this bag a little differently. We're going to take that seam we just ended up sewing, and we're going to fold that in the middle of one side, and then the zipper is centered on the other side. So you do want to match this up and just make sure this is nicely centered. And you want it centered on your seam rather than on the actual binding strip, since that, is kind of flipping and flopping around. So now we're going to draw 1.5 inch squares on each of the 4 corners. And I'm just doing that with chalk, but if you had a lighter fabric, you could do it with mechanical pencil or any kind of pencil, obviously, but just something that doesn't bleed back into the fabric. So now I'm cutting those 1.5 inch squares out, and you can see I have it clipped. I just want to make sure everything stays in place so that it's nice and square and centered. And that in the long run will make our bag just sit nice and straight. So you want to just eyeball those 4 squares and make sure they look consistent with each other. Like I said, they're 1.5 inch squares. We're going to cut all 4 of those out. And we are close to being done with this bag. We're going to sew the sides shut at this point. And what I'm doing is adding a little tab of ribbon, and it's 2.5 inches long, and then I just fold it in half. And you want the nice side showing when you fold it in half. And then those raw edges I'm going to line up with the edge of this bag. And you can see leaving kind of those ears on from what we put on the ends of our zipper just helps you to have something to line everything up with. And I'm just clipping this really well because I want that little tab to stay nice and straight. You don't want to get a tuck in that as you're sewing along here. So I'm just double checking that it's all centered. And now I'm just going to throw another binding strip on there. So this binding strip, it can be the same size as this area that we're sewing. And here I'm sewing a 1/4 inch seam, but you could sew up to like a 3/8 inch seam. We just want to make sure we catch all of those different things. So now we've sewn that first seam, and I'm just going to pop this inside out and just check it before we finish off that little binding strip, that everything is good. Because, you know, if something's wrong, we want to take the seam out now, not later. So now I'm going to cut that kind of fabric ear off, and I'm going to finish up this binding strip. But this is just so nice because it just gives it such a nice finished edge, and then it also helps the bag to sit really well when it's done and when it's inside out. So kind of serving a dual purpose. And then also we're actually, when we sew this extra seam, also just like are reinforcing those seams. So this bag I'm sewing is going to be a gift, and I'm also going to sew 2 more for gifts. It's just such a perfect size. You can put all your journaling supplies in this, or use it as a like travel bag, a makeup bag, or like put all your cords in here. These are just great little bags, especially for like organizing different things. I just love these. I use them in my drawers. So I have like different colored pens in each kind of bag, and then I can just put them in my drawers and kind of squish them in. So I kind of like it better than, you know, like a hard plastic container or something. These really work out well. So now what I'm doing is taking those 1.5 inch corners that we cut out, and you just want to pop it up so that you can match that fabric up and pin it. And then now we're putting some binding strips on those the same time we sew them. And this time though, we want our binding strips to hang over about 1.25 inches. And that's just because when we're done with this step, these are our last steps here, and we just want to make sure that we have a nice finished edge here. And it covers over everything we've done before, so that's why we don't need to fold our corners in except for the very last thing that we do. So you see I'm just folding those edges in, and in this case I'm just clipping them there, and then I'll fold the rest of it. So we cut 4 of those 1.5 inch corners out, and so we have 4 of these to do, and then our bag is done. So I'm just folding it really nice before I sew it. And all those binding strips that we've done, when you do this step, you just want to make sure they're facing the same direction. And I'll show you that in a minute here. But we just want to go ahead and sew this little strip on. And mine wasn't bulky until I got to that, like the binding strip on the other side of the bag that we sewed. And then I just went, you know, basically sewed 1 stitch at a time. And if I needed to, I could just hand crank it through that binding strip, but that was the only spot that seemed quite bulky. So if I just go slow or take 1 stitch at a time, it seems to work out fine. And I am back tacking these edges, like when I start and when I stop. Everything else I haven't really had to back tack anything. So here you see what I mean. We kind of have like a T there for our binding strips, and you just want to make sure that when you're sewing this one down, that that one is facing the same direction as the last one that you did. So we're going to repeat that on all 4 of those 1.5 inch corners we cut out, and that gives us this great boxy shape to the bag. So we just turn this inside out, and then our bag is done. And I tell you, this is just such a perfect size bag. I love it so much. And just want to show you what the binding strips look like next to that zipper, and our cute little ribbon pulls. This is just a great little bag and something that you can customize exactly the way that you want it. So I just wanted to show you a picture from my evening walk here. We're having a snowstorm, and this is right on the border between Pennsylvania and New Jersey on the Delaware River on the I-95 bridge. And I just wanted to say Merry Christmas. Thank you so much for watching and watching my different videos this year. I'm so appreciative of it. So thank you so much.